Hey there, everybody. Happy Sunday. Tim from Alpha Wolf Trading coming at you with this week's market overview and earnings stocks on the radar. I'm not going to go through all the stocks on my radar for the earnings. I've got them posted. You can take a look at all the charts. I'll go through a few of them, but different reasons for each one of them that I will be paying attention to this week for earnings. Then I've got a whole separate list, of course, for the pro members that I'll be sending out shortly. But so let's just take a real quick look at the T2108. So remember that back here when it was up in the 80s, I had some very genuine concerns that we were overdone. It could be a time to lock in some profits, build up some cash, as the markets were just looking overstretched, right? Look at the T2108. It's pulling back and closed damn near at the lows on Friday. When does this get really, so this was the signal to maybe lighten up and build up some cash here. Where does it get interesting to maybe start deploying some of that cash? Below 20 and below. You get down into the single digits, and that's maybe a time where you look to get extremely aggressive on some of the stocks that you may have on your wish list, right? So, pulled back, closed nearly at the lows. We saw some volatility spike on Friday. We closed nearly at the lows, or actually, I think we closed at the lows in the markets on Friday. The other indicator maybe take a look at here is the McClellan oscillator. When we get down to the negative 200 plus area, that is an area where we're starting to see some extreme fear. We've got a little bit of fear out there, but it's not extreme right now, right? So maybe next week we look to see if we get some extreme fear for a potential little bounce snapback type play. We've got a lot going on this week, and what the markets will focus on, I'm not really sure. Will it be the inverted yield curve? Will that carry over as concerns in the first part of next week? Possibly. Got the Mueller report that's out. That could be a catalyst in either direction, depending on what news comes from that. We've got the Apple event on Monday. That could be a market-moving event for at least the tech stocks. We've got saw a news brief that we have Lighthouser or whatever his name is, and Mnuchin going to China for more trade talks. So maybe we get China trade stuff. There's all kinds of stuff potentially that could move the markets next week, and let's just see where that winds up taking us, or what winds up getting focused on. I'm not sure what it will be, but technically closing right at the lows on Friday, not a very positive thing. So let's take a look real quick. Actually, before I get into all the sectors, let me take a look at last week's stocks to watch for the pro members and their performance for the week. STNE, which actually was also had earnings, nice pop. SMSI, nice pop there. AVID actually had a nicer run than that, got up over seven and change. TRVN also had a nice move, almost got up to $2. It's now at $1.70, but some pretty decent movers last week. And there's still a couple of stocks here that I'm still looking at. NCMI is one I think could be a trade, kind of a cyclical trade. Heading into the summer months, blockbuster movies, so forth and so on. I have interest there on that one for a swing. I didn't start one this week, but if this thing gets below $7, I could start to dip my toe there. AQB, which actually got whacked this week, I think is in a very interesting area for a potential long. More of a long-term hold type play. They did an offering. They priced it at $225. That's why the stock got hit. But I was anticipating the fact that they were going to need to raise capital after the news event. FDA lifting, I guess, the ban on their genetically modified salmon. Now they can start growing and selling that salmon. So They've got cash now. I think it's kind of a compelling story, and maybe looking to dip my toe. I'd love it to pull actually back down to, back to below $2, $1.75, somewhere in that area. Start dipping the toe, but that's one definitely going to be keeping an eye on. So let's take a look at the economic calendar this week. We've got housing starts, building permits, Case-Shiller home price index. We've got trade deficit news. Let's see what else we've got. GDP revision, pending home sales, personal income, consumer spending, core inflation, Chicago PMI. So we do have some economic data that could move the markets. And then we've got earnings. We're getting to the tail end of earnings season, but there are some stocks that are definitely on my radar this week. And I think we get Lyft. I think we get the Lyft IPO also this week. So that could be interesting. But let's go ahead and I'll highlight a few of the stocks to take a look at here. We'll start out with GEVO. So GEVO, is typically a pop and flopper. A lot of day traders been looking at it recently. Richard Branson, I think, said something about the company. This stock tends to pop and flop. And they tend to disappoint with earnings. If it gets any kind of a pop, I would not chase it. If they report good earnings by chance and give a good guide, maybe it'll pop and continue. It's worth at least having on the radar for a day trading opportunity. Like I said, don't chase it, but worth keeping an eye on with their earnings. And let me see when they actually report. GEVO reports Wednesday after the close. So that could be an interesting one to watch. QE happens to be another one. I like the way this thing is consolidating right here at the moving averages. It's below the 50-day, it's below the 200-day, but it is consolidating right here. Maybe if they report a decent earnings call, we get some kind of a breakout over the 50-day moving average, take out $15 hollow, which appears to be a level of resistance. ICLK is at an area of potential price support here, right around $4. So it had a nice little bull flag pattern. It has broken down, broke below the 200-day, broke below the 50-day. So it's got some work to do. But MACD Histo looks like maybe it's about to go positive. Stochastic starting to curl up. If they report decent earnings and give a good guide, maybe this gets a nice pop, nice gap up. It's going to have some resistance at this long-term trend line right around $5, but if it takes out $5, could be interesting. So ICLK, worth keeping an eye on for potential day trading opportunity. And if they give a good guide and good beat, maybe even consideration for a swing. RKDA, former runner, has earnings. Let's see, when do these guys report? I'm not sure which day. I can't find it. Not sure. Looking at the list. Actually, you know what? I'm going to put you on pause for a second. Hold on one second. Okay, I'm back. They report the 27th after the close. So Wednesday after the close. Kind of an interesting setup on the daily there. There's another one that's actually going to be reporting Monday after the close that could give us a little clue as to maybe what RKDA does. Yield 10, Y10. These two typically tend to move in sympathy with each other. So Y10 has kind of got an interesting look as well. It's consolidating just below the 200-day moving average, and it's a low float stock. Could get interesting, worth having on the radar. Potential day trading opportunities. Do not chase these things on gap ups. Look for some kind of an intraday setup. Look for some support to maybe play a bounce off of, but Those are on my radar. Y10 and RKDA. Pola is another one that's a really, I mean, this thing traded 2,300 shares on Friday, right? Super thin, but kind of interesting if it can take out this trend line with some kind of conviction. I think maybe you can get a pop up into the 560 area. That could act as resistance. BlackBerry has had an amazing run, actually, heading into this earnings. But look how tight this formation was right at the 200-day moving average. Now it's pulling back. Maybe this is pullback as a head fake heading into the earnings, right? So BlackBerry has had, it tends to pop off the earnings number and then it flops. So it's a big, thick stock, more of a swing, long-term hold type play. It's had an interesting run, maybe a pullback to 850 or so heading into that earnings number. They report Friday morning. That one's, I think, worth watching. SCWX, SecureWorks. This thing has been stair-stepping up. Had a big pop, pulled back at an area of potential price support here, right around $19. They report again Wednesday after, is it after the close? No, before the close, or before the open. Sorry. SCWX reports before the open, and I really kind of like the look of this thing. Momentum is looking at, I mean, the long-term chart, the longer-term time frame. We are in an uptrend. We're at an area of potential price support. Could be an interesting spot for a bounce. HYRE has had a pretty huge run off of preliminary earnings that they put out. You know, you got Lyft, that's going to be doing the IPO, I think, this week. HYRE reports Thursday after the close. Could be interesting ahead of this Lyft earnings. It's a low float stock. It's had a pretty big run, 9.9 million shares in the float. So even if they report good earnings and give a good guide, it may already be priced in. You can see it pull back maybe into the $5 range. See if that acts as potential support. You got the 50-day moving average and potential price support there in the $4.85, $5 area. And then I'm just going to end it with CRON. I put the list of the other stocks that are on my radar on the blog. You can take a look at the charts and maybe try and decipher what it is that I find interesting about those. But CRON, I think, is fairly obvious. I'm not looking necessarily for what happens with CRON off of their earnings. What I'm more interested in is what the entire sector will do, right? So if they report good numbers and you get a good move out of this, then maybe look for some potential sympathy plays within the marijuana space. I have a couple that I highlighted last week for the pro members, and they're definitely on my radar this week when Kronos reports, and they report Tuesday before the open. All right, so let's talk about the overall markets themselves, the indexes, and other things that I'll be keeping an eye on. So gold, I think there's a couple interesting looking names in the gold and silver space that I think are worth paying attention to. The sectors that I'll really be focusing on this week are IBB, which, you know, broke below the 50-day moving average. This $100 area is where I would look, or 105 actually is one area of potential support, and then $100 is the next area of potential support on IBB. IWM, small caps, they kind of led the way down, and they broke below the 50-day, right? We came up into this area of price resistance, could not break. We did pierce it. We pulled back, tried to pierce it again, and have failed. And now it looks as though we're going to put in a series of lower lows. So that is concerning for the IWM. IYT broke below the 50-day moving average. So not exactly a good sign there for transportation. QQQs did not, I mean, we're still above the 200-day. We're still above the 50-day. These, you know, that and the SMH both holding up for now. Let's see what happens with the Apple event. If we break below that 200-day, I think that would be problematic for both SMH and QQQs. And, if you look at SMH, it came up right into price resistance at about 110 and pulled back. So what we don't want to see is we don't want to see it break down back below the 200-day, back below the 50-day, back below the $100 holla. I think that would be negative for semiconductors. Let's take a look at TVIX and TZA. So if the IWM continues to roll over, then TZA could be in play. And we are nearing an area of potential price resistance. We take this area out, this $11, let's call it. We can get a nice pop up into 12 and change range. Depending on how significant of a pullback we get in the small caps. But TZA, worth keeping an eye on for a short-term trading opportunity, along with TVX if we continue to see volatility, right? If we see some fear and volatility, we could see a continuation of the move that we saw on Friday in TVIX. USO breaking this little short-term trend line here, pulling back. Maybe we find support somewhere around the 50-day moving average. Oil, UUP actually had a little bit of a bounce last week, and if that continues, that could also continue to put some pressure on equities. If that dollar starts to weaken, though, could be positive for equities. We'll have to see how it plays out. Aerospace and defense breaking below the 200-day and breaking below the 50-day. So that sector is looking a little concerning to me. Home builders, we have several home builders reporting this week. We've got, I think it's Lennar and KB Homes that are reporting. So that sector is worth keeping an eye on. I have a couple of names in that sector that I like. We do have lower, interest rates appear to be dropping now because we have a very dovish Fed all of a sudden. Forgot to even mention that, right? But that, could be a good thing, could be a bad thing. We'll have to see how it plays out. But home builders, interest rates dropping, and what are we coming up into? Home selling season. So I think it's at least worth having that on your radar, that sector, and maybe a few select names. Energy pulled back a little bit along with oil, but I still think that there's some interesting looking opportunities in the energy space. A pullback, I think, would be somewhat healthy, but there are still some really good looking individual stock setups, some charts that look really good in that space. Financials took it on the chin pretty hard, broke below the 50-day and actually broke below some short-term potential price support. Financials not looking too healthy there. Industrials pulling back. Looks like we're trying to hold on to the 50-day moving average. And XLP, consumer staples, those actually, which are considered kind of a safety trade, actually look kind of interesting, holding up a little bit, may have some more upside there. XLU is in an area of potential price or actually trendline resistance, right? But this has been a pretty strong performing sector. Utilities, another kind of a defensive space. And then XLV pulling back and testing a short-term trend line above the 200-day, above the 50-day, but we'll have to see what it does next week. It's kind of in an interesting spot. Overall, I would say this is, still a time that you want to be somewhat cautious. I think a pullback is probably deserved. Just how far of a pullback, right? I mean, do I really want to go back down and test the October lows? Not particularly. But the market really doesn't care what I want. We'll have to see how it plays out. Be careful out there. And, if you've got cash on the sidelines, you're in a very good spot. Cash is a viable position. You do not have to force trades. Be patient. Let things come to you. And that's it. That's this week's market overview, stocks to watch. Pro members, I am going to get the full list of stocks to watch out to you momentarily. And that's it. Enjoy your week. Be safe. Don't chase. Have a plan. Know your risk reward. And I'll see you all next week.